Hello and welcome to the Slow Ready Podcast, a casual drive into the music and culture of Goose. I'm Mike.
And I'm Alex.
And we are back with another exciting and huge episode where we are going to do a short recap of Goose appearances at the Bottle Rock Music Festival, a brief preview of the upcoming summer tour dates, and most importantly, we have a very exciting guest on this week that we were honored to host for an interview, none other than Mr. D. James Goodwin himself. As always, we have a lot of great ideas and future topics planned for you guys, so the best way to keep up with us is on our socials, at Slow Ready Pod. We say it every time, but pretty much anywhere you can find us, we are there. And now, before we get into our main topic, we'd like to get into the hot tea, which is the news and notes from the week of Goose. So, Goose did a lot of business on YouTube this week. They uploaded Your Direction from Gonzo, also both the Goose Dawes combos of Atlas Dog and Rockdale, and then also recently Empress into Fast Slow into Empress, as well as a Torero snip from its debut on YouTube Shorts. So there's a lot of El Gonzo content popping up on YouTube. If you somehow don't have nugs, definitely recommend checking those out. Any thoughts on that, Alex?
Atlas Dawes.
Yes, Atlas Dawes, it will forever be known as. And then also this week, Goose shared they were at Gateway Studios in St. Louis, and Getty has some new toys during the rehearsals jamming that they were doing over there. Obviously, I think all of us saw those images, and they were pretty awe-striking. Any thoughts on that, Alex?
Our minds are going to continue to be blown. It looks like they're combining the rig from last year and this winter, it seems like, and creating even more magic. Just wildness.
Yep, Getty will be at 7 lighting rigs by the end of this year or something along those lines. But the organization, as they're going by these days, also announced that due to, quote, shit being crazy out there right now, they are partnering with summer and fall venues for discounted tickets. I looked at most of the venues on the tour list. It looks like in most cases it's $10 off of lawn tickets, but that's not insignificant. So very cool that Goose is doing that for us, as times is tough out there for a lot of people.
Yeah, and we're fans of chilling on the lawn, so if you're like us and like room to dance, like, scoop them up.
I'm on the lawn all the time. And then there was a really cool limited edition merch drop partnering with Backline, which was the Be Kind to Your Mind hoodie. Proceeds are going towards helping support Backline's mission, which is helping artists, crew, and industry workers get the mental help that they need. I absolutely love that Goose is always involved in these amazing causes. Any thoughts on that one, Alex? Did you get the hoodie by chance? I know you're a hoodie nut.
I really, really wanted it, but I had to remove myself from my phone and my computer for several hours to avoid buying my 30th hoodie. Yes, it's a dope design.
The struggle was super real. And then this is by far the biggest news in our world, and I'm sure for many of you as well. The Chateau Sessions Part 3 debuted on Saturday at 9 p.m. on YouTube. I know me and Alex both watched it that night, and then I've watched it several times since then. Any high level or even detailed thoughts on the performances here, Alex? I know people have been going a little bit crazy about a few of them.
Real high level thoughts. I thought it was cool to see Fast Slow was thought out in advance of Gonzo by at least a few days when they were doing these sessions. We had kind of gotten a snippet of, or we had seen some clips, at least on Instagram and stuff like that, of the guys jamming at the Chateau, and then to see it kind of the full session now and see that it included stuff like Fast Slow and the new tracks from Everything Must Go was pretty cool to see. I thought the two highlights of the show were the bookend songs, so the Fast Slow jam and the Chateau jam. It felt in the moment like it was an extension of How It Ends, but sure enough, there was like a 3 microsecond gap between the start of the jam and How It Ends, so it is its own song. But yeah, it's awesome to hear like a TED Tape style jam session like this, and I'm here for any and all improv Goose is willing to share with us.
Definitely. There's all kinds of magic that obviously happens at the Chateau, including apparently if you're there, you might get to dance with Shasta during a jam. So that became a new life goal for me this week. And also totally agree. I think the bookends are definitely the highlights. Fast Slow felt like in Mexico, they stayed a little closer to the key of the song, but you rightly called out that this kind of morphs into the upbeat disco style Disco Inferno type vibes from Goosmiths, and it really, really hits really well. And then Dustin Hoffman, only the second time we've seen it in a live setting, but still feels appropriate to say we finally have our first taste of what this song's true potential is, because there's actually a really, really solid jam on this one.
Yeah.
And then the Chateau Jam 2, it's probably not going to qualify for Jam of the Year, but what can you say? It's definitely one of the best jams of recent memory, and initially kind of reminds you of a 726 Blissy space, but it really takes its time and goes into a lot of interesting directions. So yeah, start to finish, this was absolutely mesmerizing, and I'm going to be watching it a lot over the next couple months. So definitely encourage you, if you somehow haven't, get on it.
So yeah, that's gonna be in the background quite a bit while I'm working. Is the Chateau Jam Part 2 there? It's just quite the roller coaster ride, and honestly, just makes me want another iteration of the TED tapes to come out, because when this band is jamming, there's nothing better than it. Like freestyle jamming with no tethers attached. There's nothing better for me, at least. Yeah. How do we get like a Getty to build a fake chateau around the band at every live show so they feel as comfortable as they do there and can jam like that in every live setting is what I want to know.
Yeah, I mean, counterpoint, if they can't do that, what is the cost for you and I to get to the chateau for a session? Because I don't think there's a limit on what I would spend.
We can both strum a few chords on our acoustic guitars. Like, we can contribute too, like, might not sound good, but hey.
At least good enough to lead your church youth group. So, I mean, that's got to count for something.
The other question I have too is, as much as we know everyone in Goose is animal lovers and dog lovers, where are the dog friendly shows? Like, my puppy Mango wants to come and hang out with Shasta. So when's that going to happen?
We've definitely got to get that in the works. That is a super good call out.
Yeah, we need a dog friendly environment.
Yeah.
One show.
Yeah, and Dogs in a Pile can open. It sounds perfect to me.
Boom. There you go.
And then the other biggest thing was that yesterday Goose did kind of the starting point of this summer tour run here, but they did their bottle rack appearance with two sets, a main set, and they also did one for VIP guests, apparently. You want to take us through that briefly here, Alex?
Yeah, so early in the day, Goose did a VIP set, a short one. I think it was half an hour. Open with Rockdale, then Lead Up, California Magic, and Hot Tea to close out this VIP set. Pretty cool. I mean, you only got a half an hour, so to see some of the bigger tunes off the new record, and then a Rockdale is great. And then you get the main set, and it starts off with a Hot Love. Always love a Hot Love opener. Then we get Animal, Silver Rising, Your Direction into I Would Die For You, the Prince cover that everyone loves. And then a Hunger Sight into Slow Ready into Give It Time to Close. We didn't have access to really watch this like we normally do on Nugs or anything like that, but I saw a few clips. Looked like a great time. It's always weird seeing Goose when there's daylight out, though. Like, there's something about the light show that really adds to the aesthetic. But it looked like a great time, and I've heard nothing but great things about the festival. So hopefully anyone there had a good time.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me too when they have like one of these like standalone shows preceding a 2-night run, what kind of songs they utilize, because obviously we talk about it a lot. The catalog is so deep and so much quality top to bottom, but when you see songs like Rockdale and Hunger Sight, you wonder kind of what that might mean for the shows coming up this week. But really good set. If you happen to make it to that festival, you're getting to hear a lot of the best songs that Goose has for sure.
Yeah, and we love seeing these festival set lists and how much better they are than like other bands that we've followed in the past. Like, you're definitely getting more variety when it comes to Goose.
Yeah, they do not slouch for festival sets. And then the last order of business before we get to our main event here with D. James Goodwin, which can't wait for you to hear that, is Goose does have a bunch of shows. Summer tour is starting to heat up this week officially. So wanted to do a brief preview of the shows that we'll actually be recapping for you this Sunday. Just what's on the agenda for Goose coming up here. So starting off on the 27th and the 28th. So tomorrow, as we're recording Tuesday and Wednesday, Goose is going to be at the Masonic, which is a very old, small capacity venue. Used to be the meeting center for the Freemasons, actually. Lots of cool artwork, very quirky design to the building, but right in the heart of San Francisco. First time at the venue, but they obviously have a lot of great performances in the San Francisco area. look no further than, the Great American Music Hall and then Regency Ballroom shows from 2022, which had a legendary Wisteria and excellent Elmig, as well as the Goat Labyrinth. And then on May 30th, they're going to be at Hayden Homes Amphitheater in Bend, Oregon, which is an 8K capacity, so a little bit bigger. Opened up in 2002. Most of the big artists that come through Oregon play there. First time at the venue for them. So, and only the second time in Bend, Oregon. So, not a lot of history there. But the only other time they were there was at the Midtown Ballroom in February of 2022. And it was notable because the band opened and ended the show with a tribute to Gold by Duke Harrington as a nod to Groundhog Day. And also the first time Silver Rising was ever played. And then last on the agenda, they've got the Idaho Botanical Gardens, which, as I researched this, I think it's like one of my new favorite venues and kind of a bucket list is for me to get there. But it's located in what used to be a penitentiary for the state of Idaho, and that when it closed, they turned it into a botanical garden on over 42 acres. And the Outlaw Field where Goose will be playing is a capacity of only 4,000, and they've hosted Ray Charles, Sheryl Crow, Bob Dylan, and a bunch of others. And this is only the second time tripping out to Boise, as the last time was April of 2023, which had a really great All I Need and a rarely seen cover of Get the Funk Out of My Face. So really awesome week of shows coming up here, Alex. Any high level thoughts on this before we get into our recap next weekend of the sets?
Main thought is, how do we fly out to the West Coast last minute? Because this looks like a really cool run to be checking out. We won't be covering the next round of shows on the episode, but it's an easy trip to continue to Las Vegas and Phoenix after that too, if you can make the West Coast run happen. But it looks like it's going to be a great start to the tour. I mean, you obviously got a taste of what the tour is going to bring in Napa yesterday at the time of this recording, and it's just only going to get better from here with the 2-night run to kick things off. So very excited.
Yeah, we are both excited to be where we belong, back on the couch touring it up. So
let's go.
Cannot wait to get into all of that. This is our Super Bowl, baby. But with no further ado, definitely want to get into our main topic with our very special guest, D. James Goodwin. So y'all enjoy. Hey everyone, me and Alex are very excited and humbled to be joined today by our new friend, the producer of the absolutely excellent last two studio albums from Goose, Mr. D. James Goodwin. Dan, thank you so much for coming on, and how are you doing today?
Oh man, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Doing awesome, man. Really excited to have you on.
Beautiful. Likewise. I'm really glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, when we first reached out to you, we were surprised and honored to learn you had listened to our Everything Must Go episode where we broke down the latest album from Goose, which you, of course, produced. And maybe even a little bit more surprised to hear that you had responses to some of our takes. So wanted to kind of start this off, if you're into it, by letting you have the floor to share some of those with us and our listeners back home, as I'm sure they're just as interested as we are in hearing your process and maybe some of the why behind the approach you ended up taking for some of these studio tracks.
Totally. Yeah. I have to admit that I don't remember all of my responses to I don't remember all the takes. I'm sure I remember all my responses if you reminded me, but I do remember one. I think there was something about, it may have been one of you, I might have been Alex, was talking about how Rick's guitar tone, you could tell that it was like the old guitar tone or something on one of the tracks, and I can't remember which one it was specifically, but it actually wasn't his old guitar tone.
Oh, well, there you go.
Wow.
And also it's funny because I've actually noticed that comment from a few other people. Like, you can tell what is Rick's old sound before he moved to the Fenders. The truth is, we actually cut most of the record, if not, I think 99% of it, with the Fenders, or the solos anyway. I think there were like 2 solos that we didn't use Fenders on, but he was using my Fender Deluxe, which actually moved him toward using Deluxes in general now for pretty much most of the record. I mean, that was like a small super inside baseball thing, but I think there was like 1 or 2 other takes that you guys had that I was like, nah, that's complete bullshit. That's not what happened, or something else. I just don't remember what they were.
Oh, we would love for you to give us shit on the air. Like, if you can remember anytime, just chime in. Like, we love that.
I mean, there's transcripts, right? Like, I could probably go online and do it in real time, but I don't want to waste time doing it. But I know there were a couple where I was just like, no, I gotta correct these guys. That's totally wrong. But I could, like, I get a lot of shit from Goose fans in general, which is hilarious to me. But so some of it's just totally reactive to that. Like I remember when the lead up single came out, and everybody was like, "This sounds nothing like the live version," and I was like, "It's basically like the live version. It's just not. You don't have 2,500 people around you, and you're not." Being blasted by a PA system. It's exactly totally the same tune. We really didn't do anything to it. Maybe it's a little slower than some live performances, but like that's the studio. But it really wasn't that dramatically different. It's not like Arrow from Dripfield. Like I got so much shit for that one, but most of the decisions on this record, except for Everything Must Go, were pretty close to like how things were played live.
Definitely agree with that. You know, and obviously when we recorded, our initial reactions were that was like a month ago at this point. Now
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like listening to the album more and more. It's like you come to like understand or appreciate more of the decisions and kind of like that stark contrast in your head from the live versions and what you hear on the studio. Just suddenly kind of like those differences that you might initially be taken aback by, or just like, oh, this is kind of great now listening to this, and this is like a
right.
2.0 version or something completely new.
Also, there's that thing, of course, I'm sure you guys are aware of this, where if the songs are played so much live before they get on a record, you it's kind of an unfair burden. You know what I mean? Because everybody, particularly in the jam band world, they already give deference to live versions in general. And then if you've got, 50 or 60 versions of a song that you can go back and on Bandcamp or Nugs or whatever and listen to, it's really, really hard to make a new definitive version for those people. So, I mean, the fact that I think we really successfully made new definitive versions for pretty much everything here is kind of a testament to how well we made the record. But it is still it's a tough mountain to climb because for a song like Animal is a great example of this actually, because there are so many versions of Animal live. And when we were first talking about making the record, I had a real reservation about tracking Animal because as much as I loved it, I knew even at the time, which was 2 years ago now, I knew that they had played it so much live that I was worried that we wouldn't be able to to make it a thing that was like special on record. Like Feel It Now, I saw a path forward to make it really special on record. California Magic. I mean, most of the tracks I saw kind of a pathway forward to make it kind of singular, like still be the live thing, but still make it a singular entity. But Animal was one where it was like, man, how do we make this its own thing, but still be equally good as the live stuff and not have people pissed off about it? And part of that was the horns. I mean, the horn parts made a difference there, but also like just capturing energy is tough because the live performance is a live performance, as you guys know. And when you have, thousands of people around you and you're watching something or you're listening to it live, there's all this sort of like, it's like doing your hair really nice. And then there's these flyaways. And live, there's all these flyaways, but it actually gives your hair a lot of character. Like my beard, right? If I didn't blow dry my beard, it would be blown out to hell. But if I really do my beard and put stuff in it and then it looks all nice and trim, but then somebody sees me and they're like, wait, your beard's not as wild as it was the last time I saw you. I prefer it the other way. I know it's a weird analogy, but it's just hard. It's hard to make records with bands like Goose that make such great live performances of these things. You really have to push the ball up the hill. And I don't know what that was a big tangent, but the point being that I think we really did a good job of actually making singular new kind of benchmark versions of these songs for the most part.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think it's also like kind of baked into the recipe that we were kind of reviewing it like after only 2 days of listening to it. And I know for me personally, at least when it comes to music, I usually need a little bit of time to digest it and have it kind of start marinating and resonating with me. And I feel like
Sure.
I definitely agree with Alex's point. Like as I've had more time to listen to it, it just works better with every re-listen. But you kind of touched on something here that was part of our questions. I think it kind of leads into it really nicely. But where do you find the inspiration for taking songs that are well established, like in a unique direction? Is it like a spontaneous epiphany of a sound, or is it something that's kind of like massaged over time?
It's probably a bit of both, really. There's some that, like when I hear for the first time, if Rick sends me either a demo or a live version, maybe they've played, like, for instance, actually, Torero, the new song that they played that they debuted at Gonzo. I heard that Rick sent me that from Gonzo for the first time right after they played it, and immediately in my head I heard like four or five things that I think can happen in the studio to that tune. And then with others, like Everything Must Go was a process. It was definitely neither Rick or I were sold with the way they used to play it. Neither of us really liked it, and we wanted to change it. And Rick was sort of like, he gave me a couple things of, I guess you could call them little nuggets of inspiration that he thought about when he thought about how he wanted the song to be, and then kind of left me to my devices. And that one I just sort of worked on and massaged over the course of like 3 or 4 days until I finally saw like the clouds clear a little bit. And then I was like, oh, I think I found something cool. And then when I saw that idea through, then Rick came in and listened to it, was like, holy shit, this is it. And then we pushed through on that. So it's really a combination of both. Like sometimes nothing much comes too. I mean, Lead Up is an example of a song where it was kind of great as it was. And it didn't really need, I didn't need to do a lot. We had some elements of spookiness that we kind of built into the intro and the verses, but other than that, it wasn't calling for much, you know? And a lot of times in the studio, I think the tendency for a lot of people is they want to put their fingerprint on stuff, so they almost force feed ideas into something. And I've been doing this long enough now where I know if that's an ill-fated prospect. You know, I can kind of tell if I'm forcing an idea just to make it different. I can sort of see it pretty quickly in the process. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes you just have to like back off and kind of get objective again.
That's so interesting. So EMG you mentioned was a tricky one to figure out. Was that the hardest track to figure out in your opinion on the album, or
Um,
um,
that and Silver
maybe your
Rising.
favorite even?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a favorite. EMG is definitely a favorite. I think my actual favorite track on the record, I'll just get this out of the way, is California Magic. I just every time I listen to it, I smile so broad. I'm happy with every decision we made on that. I think the horns are amazing. I think Peter's fucking weird keyboard solo is incredible. I love that entire track. I mean, I love the whole record, and I'm the sort of person where if I'm not super 100% happy with something, the record's not done yet. It's just that's the way it is for me. And even if the guys were like, "Yeah, we're 100% stoked," if I still felt like I could extract that extra 2% from something, I'm gonna go for it. And luckily with these guys, it's not like there's a label breathing down our necks that we have to get something out by a certain time. So there's a little bit of leeway in that. But moving backwards, yeah, EMG was definitely one of the tougher ones to get. Just tougher in the sense of like figuring out what the best clothing was for that song, because you could strip away all the stuff and just give me like the guitar changes and the vocal, and there's a song there, there's a great song there. So it was a matter of like, how do we, it's like decorating a Christmas tree, like how do we decorate it and how do we actually build the tree. But the other one that was actually surprisingly tough was Silver Rising, because we had cut a track of that way early on, and it kind of wasn't working. I think the way they played it for a really long time had some issues with me with like transitions and stuff. And I loved the song, and like sometimes it was nailed and sometimes it just wasn't there. And then really late in the process, I was still feeling sort of semi not sold on it, on the way we did it anyway. And Rick was also not sold on it. And when they started playing it with Cotter, Rick called me one day and was like, "I think I figured it out. It's this feel thing, and Cotter does this new thing that is kind of how I've always wanted the song to feel." And so we made the decision to go back in when we cut Give It Time and How It Ends. We also did Silver Rising in that session with Cotter, and it just totally opened it up. And it was a simple thing. I mean, it's nothing I could even really put words to. It just didn't feel correct until they started playing it with Cotter, and then it just felt right. It felt explosive and it felt dynamic. It had to have like more flow in it, and before it was just a little too kind of rigid and structured. And Cotter just made it swing in a really cool way. So that was the other tough one. That was kind of, it was not, it was just tough to understand why it wasn't feeling right that was the toughest part of it. And then once we got it, it was like, that's great.
We're definitely firm believers that Cotter cures all ills. So right there with you on that.
Cotter's incredible. I mean, just the fact that like I can't go much into it, but they're just communicating so beautifully now as a four piece. And I don't know if you guys watched the Chateau Sessions Part 3 the other night. You can see it there. It's
Oh
like
yeah.
just the language that they're starting to build together as a four piece, particularly Rick and Cotter, because like that's the tension release thing between those two, especially. And Trevor is more expressive now as a bassist, which is like, I mean, I knew Trevor's brilliance on Dripfield was not lost on me. I loved Trevor's playing on Dripfield, but on this record in particular, and then newer stuff that we've been working on, Trevor's just like constant genius. It's constant genius, even in the simplest things, and it's really blowing me away how his voice is becoming much more expressive with Cotter. It's just incredible.
Totally agree on that. And I think Rick said after they were leaving the Cap Theater last year, the first shows with Cotter, we unlocked Trevor as a bass player. And
Yeah,
I think he hit the nail on the head right there. They're a wonderful rhythm section at this point.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Going back a little bit to Everything Must Go, obviously that track and a few of the tracks on this album, they all have a lot of electronic touches. Was that like an intentional choice from the get go, or how did that come about?
It was, yeah. I think when Rick and I first talked about this record, and Peter too, a lot of the talk was like we wanted the record to really feel modern. And there was kind of an intention with Dripfield to give it. Dripfield was like a pretty stylized, I wouldn't call it like a vintagey sounding record, but there was definitely elements of that we were trying to pull in and simplifying some things, using a lot of vintage instruments and stuff. And part of the impulse on this record was doing the live banger thing as well as we could, but also adorning it with really modern sort of decision making and modern kind of just stuff that didn't feel like it was borrowing from the past so much. And so some of that came from the electronic drums, and some of it also was just a matter like I don't like using click tracks in the studio. So sometimes if we need a metronome, I'll build a drum machine thing just for somebody to play to because it's a way more inspiring sound to play to than just like a cowbell going 1 2 3 4, you know. And then maybe like a third of the way into the process we'll realize like wow, these are actually working and it's cool the way the interplay is happening. So we just maybe treat the sounds and keep them in. So some of it was accident too, but yeah, most of it was impulse to be there for sure. And a lot of that, like Rick as you guys know, is heavily inspired by Justin Vernon from Bon Iver, and there's a lot of that language in Rick's. Um, I think his instincts relate to that a lot, and I mean, I love electronic music, so for me, it's kind of a no brainer, and it's very easy to find my way into that stuff.
Totally hear the Bon Iver, a little
Yeah,
Radiohead vibe. I'm a big Radiohead fan. I love that sound.
definitely. Yeah,
So that kind of brings my thought process way back to when you first met Goose. Now that you're so familiar with Rick and Peter and the guys, and you've talked in previous interviews about when you first hopped on for Dripfield with the guys. But I'm curious what qualities about Goose's music or hanging out with the guys in the studio drew you into collaborating with them for multiple projects at this point. Was there something that clicked during that session, or was it was just a great work environment? I'm just curious, maybe what inspired you to want to continue the work.
I mean, for me, I just think they're great dudes. That's a huge part of it. I mean, I'll work with anybody, even if it's shitty music, if they're just great people, you know? It's like that. I can't think of a worse way to spend my time than working on a great record with really shitty human beings, you know? There's nothing worse than that. You could argue that it would be worse to work on shit music with shitty human beings, but I would never do that. So, but I have worked on records that I'm not necessarily a fan of, but because I like the people. So that's first and foremost. Like these guys are like family to me at this point, and I'd like to think the same in the other direction. But yeah, I mean, we just had a good working relationship. I think we can communicate pretty easily. Rick and I are pretty transparent with each other. If I don't like an idea or if he doesn't like an idea, we can pretty easily talk about it and suss it out. And I think, I mean, there could come a time where either of us myself or the four of them get tired of working with one another, but I don't think we've reached that yet. And I think there's still a lot of ground to cover. But for me, I mean, the songs are amazing. That's like the first thing, when Goose reached out to me, the thing that because I didn't know their music, and I'm not a big jam band guy. I mean, I had done a record with Bob Weir, but it was like not his jam record, um, which is funny. But I think the thing that stood out to me first and foremost was, and I've said this before, the songs and Rick's voice. Really, just those two things. Rick has a gorgeous voice. Most jam bands don't have great singers. I have no qualms in saying that. They're really usually pretty bad, and Rick's voice is amazing, and the songs are just incredible. The songs are very easy. You can like pull all the stuff you can pull the 20-minute jams away, pull all the adornments and overdubs away, and they're just good songs at the core. And those are the two things that really matter to me first and foremost. So like when you have great songs and great players, which they are, and then on top of it just being really good human beings, it's kind of like it's pretty much a no-brainer. And at this point, there's a lot of trust, I think now. We've established, like Dripfield, they really trusted me on that record. And then on this record, I really started trusting them more. And I think at this point, there's kind of this really beautiful cycle of trust happening and communication that really helps us get good work done.
Yeah, definitely agree with all of that.
Yeah, I can totally hear that through, the EPs released even after it seemed like there was even more risk taking and chances in some aspects there. And then now it seems like leaning even more into Goose's live sound in some instances, and then the studio magic in others is just,
Yeah.
it's really cool to hear it ebb and flow and evolve.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's beautiful about them is they don't have to stick to a genre. I mean, people might get annoyed at Rick. I think Rick was like kind of misrepresented a couple of years ago when he talked about not wanting to be labeled a jam band. I think a lot of people misrepresented or misunderstood what he meant to say there. They're clearly a jam band. He clearly is okay with that, but they don't have to like live in any particular world of or genre of music. I mean, this record's getting called yacht rock a lot, which is kind of funny to me because there's like maybe one song on the record that you could call yacht rock, but they can live there. But then we can do a song like Iguana Song, which starts with one of Peter's classically weird, quirky tunes, and then goes into this like extended krautrock jam at the end. I mean, like what other band can do that? It's kind of incredible. And the fact that there's no real boundaries to what we have to work with is just, I mean, it's so liberating. It's also debilitating because you sometimes get option paralysis. I mean, this record's kind of an example. There's so much music on this record, and it could have easily been three records. You could have easily split this material up into three things, but Rick's impulse was that this was like a big circus snapshot of the band's history, and I think it's perfectly appropriate.
If you're going back to like the CD days, you guys used every bit of space possible in terms of the track lengths.
Yeah,
Like if you're going for an official release,
yeah, no doubt.
it's pretty great.
Yeah. I remember quite early on, I was like, dudes, this is going to be four records if we keep going. And that's it's a lot of music. I love it, but it is a lot of music.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite things about them that they are just so brave about conquering new musical frontiers and just
Yeah.
playing with all the different colors of the palette. And I know you said when Dripfield was coming out that you really wanted to switch things up with them because they already had hundreds of hours of live recording. So why just make a typical jam band album? Did the
Yeah.
approach change at all coming into Everything Must Go? Were there conversations about intentionally switching things up even further? Because obviously Dripfield was,
Yeah.
kind of a big departure that worked really well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when they reached out to me for Dripfield, one of the big impulses was to just completely subvert everything they had done prior and to kind of just give me the reins to take it in a different direction. And I think the shorthand for that, which I think I'd take issue with, but I understand why people use it, is like going more indie rock. And that's a lot of what we did on Dripfield. And I think at the end of the day, that record really established them as something different than a typical jam band. And it obviously increased their profile. I mean, they played Radio City when the record came out. They've blown up since then. So there's no question that I think that record went a great deal toward that happening. Um, but on this one, yeah, the impulse was to kind of veer back to not deconstructing the songs as much, getting back to the live thing, but finding a new way. Like I was saying when I first was talking, like finding a new way to make these things interesting in the studio and still doing the live thing, but maybe not going fully into that, but a much more modern take on the music, less stylized in certain ways, and kind of just opening up our palette. I think the biggest thing was just making sure we weren't cutting off or deliberately making things shorter just for the sake of making them shorter, you know? And that's how we ended up with something like Iguana Song that's super long. It didn't need to be that long at the end if you're really, doing the math, but like it feels great, so why not? Solos were a little longer. There were definitely more solos on this record than Dripfield, and just making decisions like that, like not necessarily making pop songs. I mean, Give It Time is the radio single was even like 6 minutes long or something, and yeah, I just think that the impulse was like, let's not force those rules upon ourselves and see what happens.
There you go. Speaking of not forcing the rules on anything, often a complaint that we've heard from our listeners, I don't know if complaint's the right word, but like feedback is like, why would they include horns on the studio cut when there's not horns in the band? We are here for them, just for the record. And I'm just curious, you know, was there a discussion to have the horn sound be so much more prominent on EMG than even Dripfield, having the access to Stuart Bogey and all of that compared to having to do it remote, for Dripfield? Or was it just kind of something the band got attached to and you got attached to and just wanted to use more?
I mean, I love horns. They're huge to me. I've known Stuart for almost, I guess, 15 years now. We've done so many records together, and so I'm always a fan. If I hear them in a song, I'm not bashful about saying I hear horns here. Let's try it. And then I know the band loves horns, and I don't think they really care that there's not going to be horns live because it opens up the opportunity for people to sit in, which I think is fun. And it's also just, again, one of those things that the band can use to differentiate itself from live performances, which I think all of them collectively are completely comfortable with, if not advocates for. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think pretty early on we talked about horn. Like I knew Animal had to have horns. Like for me, it was a no. It was just absolutely essential that that song had like a sort of Michael Jackson-y, Phil Collins-y sort of horn thing. It just felt completely right. And then like Feel It Now was a bit of an accident. I knew I wanted horns on certain parts of the song, but the decision to have Stewart play originally that long extended section was going to have a Rick solo like it typically does live. And my thought was, well, we've got, 13 other songs with Rick solos. Let's just like have Stu shed on this and see what happens. And he did one take, and all of us were just like freaking the fuck out. And the amazing thing, yeah, was having Stuart and Dave and Andrew in the room cutting horns was so much cooler now because we could write parts beforehand and then kind of work on them in the room or in the moment you could be like, hey, I heard this idea, try this, and you sing it to them and then they do it and then you kind of work it out, and it's just like working that way is so much more powerful than working remotely. The remote thing on Dripfield was my impulse for sure. I mean, Arrow was sort of my desire to do a kind of Afrobeat Fela Kuti kind of tune. And knowing Stu for years and knowing that he knew that kind of stuff inside and out, I was just like, I think he should play on this. And the band was like, yeah, totally go for it. We've never done this before, but try it. And I think part of the Dripfield, we only had it on 2 songs on Dripfield, partly because it was remote and partly because I think more horns on that record would have been a massive shift of like where the band was at the time that I'm not sure that they would be prepared for. But on this record, it was like all bets are off and they were totally in. And yeah, I think we ended up adding horns maybe to 1 or 2 more tunes than originally planned, but every for the most part, everything we decided to have horns on was intentional from the beginning.
That Feel It Now story is so cool, and
Yeah.
my mind would be blown by that if like one take. if it wasn't for seeing Stewart at Luna Luna
Yeah.
and the instant chemistry, just riffing off with Peter and Rick taking lead and stuff like that. That just blew my mind in that moment.
Yeah.
And now hearing that story is just like, oh, of course it was one take.
It was one take. I mean, he did, in full disclosure, he did 3 full passes of that solo. The first one was the one I used. I used it in its entirety, no edits. And because that was the first, it had just a spirit. It was pure reaction, pure improvisation. And then the other two, he like started to land on something really cool and was kind of going for a different, like almost a part based arrangement. And it was very cool. But the first thing that he played was just reaction and pure instinct, and that's what we all in the room reacted to, and so I just ended up using that. I think the other two we just did for safety, like just in case something beat it, you know.
That is so cool. Thank you for sharing
And
that.
he was like, his face was bright red too at the end of that take, because at the very end, I mean, he's like just blazing, and his face is like beet red. He's completely out of breath. I think somebody's got video of it, and Peter may have taken video of it somewhere. It's so good.
I hope we get to see that at
I
some
love
point.
that.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Well, it wasn't just the horns. There were obviously a lot more artists featured on this album in general. Can you speak to like what that was like specifically, at least in regards to the different drummers, and how did that impact the process?
Yeah,
Maybe even
yeah.
tell us like which drummers were on which tracks to the best of your memory.
Um, yeah, I'll have to tread lightly here, but
Okay,
for various
fair.
reasons. I will say we obviously cut a large chunk of the record when Ben was in the band. He's on a lot of the songs on the record, and when the change happened, like I was aware of what was happening right in the middle of everything going on, and there were obviously talks about, what do we do? Do we recut songs? Do we keep stuff? How are we going to approach this? I mean, that was a big, it was simultaneously a long conversation, but also a fairly short one, because what we had was really working. So, on a song like, let's just say Redbird. Redbird is clearly Ben playing. I think anybody who understands drums knows that that's Ben. Um, that was a song, it was completely working. We had the bulk of that song done for months, and there just seemed to be no plausible reason to go back and recut anything, unless it had to be like a legal reason, or maybe, something outside of musical. But we just made the decision with stuff like that. We made the decision that if it was working and it was working well, there was no reason to go back and recut anything. So most of it was additive. So once Cotter joined the band, there were still 3 or 4 songs that needed to be cut for the record. And the record could have been done at that point. But I think a big part of the impulse was Cotter had just joined the band. It was, let's get him agency and like ownership over his role in the band, so he's not just playing somebody else's parts. Um, so we had Give It Time, How It Ends, Silver Rising we ended up doing, and he did a lot of overdubs on stuff and some other things. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it was just additive. It was like we had a lot of stuff that worked from tracks that we had already started with Ben. Um, and for a lot of that stuff, we just didn't need to go back and revisit it. It felt spiritually like we would be working against all the effort we had made. And also it would have taken an insane amount of time. And we would have really been chasing, things that we spent time in the studio on in the first place, recording. You're sort of, when you're going back to recut something, you're like chasing that feeling again, and you'll never get there. And so it either has to become something entirely different, or you just don't do it. And I think in this case it just made sense, in most of those cases, not to do it. And the Jeff stuff was, obviously Jeff had tracked on everything, so the record was finished when Jeff left the band. I mean, the record was already finished. The singles were coming out, so it was clear that none of that was going to change. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was weird. I mean, it was a weird process, but it was good that when it happened, the band felt much more, um, on the other side of the hill. The transition, the band felt happier and more positive and more constructive together. And I think that was a huge thing. And I think that there was a lot of like latent tension under the surface leading up to the transition that nobody on the outside would have really known. And I saw all the hot takes online about fist fights backstage and people fucking other people's girlfriends, and that stuff's all nonsense. It's just absurd. It's like Reddit is just a cesspool
Yep.
of bad opinions. Really,
Agreed.
all it really was just a change in direction because the band was not working at its best, and that's really the simplest way to put it. And then I think after the transition, and I mean Ben's a great drummer. We all know Ben's an amazing drummer, so it's not about his musical ability or anything. It was just where the band was and needing to go in a direction that I don't think suited everybody fully. And once the transition was made, the band just felt better as a unit. And that's the best way to put it, really.
Definitely. And I want to say it's like super impressive how much musical cohesion there is to this, even with the differences in personnel. Like you just
Yeah.
fully feel like the album is just all one big piece, which is I think what you're hoping for. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, the personnel didn't affect that at all.
Yeah. That was a big worry. I mean, going into the change, I was like, oh shit. Like, how do we make this work? Because I wasn't familiar with Cotter's playing all that much when we went into the studio. I mean, obviously, when he joined the band, I met him and we talked and I hung out at a couple rehearsals and stuff. But it's different when you're in the studio. And I was a little bit like, oh, this could be really tough. But like a few hours into the first session, it was clear that everything was going to be fine. And I think that's part of my job is to make sure everything sounds cohesive and I was comfortable that I could make that work. But yeah, I mean, it's just a big question mark when you have a big change like that.
And I think we mentioned this on our EMG album, but we just want to tell you too, as we're talking face to face here, that it seems like even though it was a turbulent time in the band with the lineup changes and everything, just like capturing the different phases of the transition and like how it all worked out beautifully and how every era of Goose has kind of worked out in such a magical way to get them to where they are today. I feel like that's captured so well on this album. I
Oh,
just
cool.
wanted to shout that out to
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Thank you. I'm super proud of the record. I think the record sounds great and yeah, there's nothing I wish I had back. Sometimes you make a record and you're like, oh, I wish I could have that one back and change that, but there's nothing on this. And I still listen to it, which is crazy. I don't often listen to records because, we spent 2 years making this record. The last thing one would think I would do is like you listen to it in my recreational time, but I actually love it.
So that you mentioned the 2 years. That actually piques my interest for another question that we've had for a while, Mike and I at least, about the timing of the album, and then Goose also just doing the thing where they'll just drop new songs in the live setting. Like last year, Big Modern was a song that they just randomly dropped for us before we even knew when EMG was going to come out. So where was kind of the cutoff point, I guess, for this, like when the album was kind of done with the main recording process outside of some mild re-records or overdubs or something like that? And was there any thought to including songs like a Big Modern on the album, or was that too far past the cutoff point?
Um, I, I mean, Big Modern, they had started playing before we were finished with the record, but Rick had, I think, his own internal separation with songs. So it was never, Big Modern was never discussed as being part of this record. And there are a
Yeah.
bunch of other songs that, oh God, I got to tread lightly here, that were started but intended for a different project. Um, and most of what we worked on was, yeah, I don't know that there was a cutoff per se, but there was definitely a point at which we were all following Rick's lead when Rick was like, yes, that's the last one I want to cut for this record. I think Rick always had a
Okay.
sense, or at least at some point, he developed a sense of what he wanted this record conceptually to be and where he wanted it to sort of cut off. And we knew that, I think, pretty much after our second session with Cotter, maybe after we did Give It Time and Silver, um, or no, I guess it was a different session. I don't know. Either way, like there was a clear point at which we were like, yeah, great. All the basic band tracks are done. And Big Modern was never discussed. And Big Modern, Salt, a couple of the other newer ones were never to be included on Everything Must Go. Never talked about to be included.
Okay. Yeah, it was just interesting how it lined up fairly well with the first Cotter shows at the Cap for a
Yeah.
lot of these tracks that Cotter recorded on, at least. So we were just curious about the timing, but that's really interesting to hear.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I do think there was some excitement when Cotter when well, they unearthed How It Ends. How It Ends had been in Rick's Rhoda for a couple of years. But I think they had kind of not really played it much with Ben, if really at all. And then when they were rehearsing with Cotter, I think just Rick pulled it out one day, just like, hey, let's check out this tune. And they played it. And Rick sent me a demo the night they played it. He sent me like a recording from their rehearsal room. And I was like, dude, we probably have to record this. It's really good. And he was like, yeah, I think so too. So there was a lot of excitement, when Cotter came on. It was like very easy for, and Give It Time was the same thing. It was like, oh, this has to go on the record. It's just no question about it. And Big Modern, when they first played Big Modern, I said to Rick, where do you see this song going? And I think I said to him at the time, I think we were backstage actually at the Cap, and I was like, I don't think we can fit this on the record, nor do I think it should go on the record because it kind of feels like a different thing. And he said, yeah, I think this is a different thing. So we just shelved that. But Give It Time, it was like, no, I feel like this could be, Rick felt like this could be on Everything Must Go. And I didn't disagree with him, even though at that point we were already up to, 80 minutes of music or something, which
Yeah,
is
you're cutting it close on
yeah, I mean, like most records are 40 minutes, right? Or 42 minutes. So like this record is literally two records and not just a double record. It's like two full records. It's pretty crazy.
I mean, the Goose fans would buy a 7 LP final set.
That's what I think at some point, like the pop producer in me turned around to Rick and was like, dude, this is too long. And Rick was like, our fans don't give a shit about that. And I was like, all right, fair enough. And he's right.
He
He's totally
understands his
right.
audience at least.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
got to
He
give him that.
does.
Yeah, for sure.
And you may have just answered this honestly, so if it's no, that's totally fine. But I know when Dripfield came out, you had talked about you felt like Travelers and Elmig were some of the best things you recorded from those sessions. I'm
Yeah.
guessing no, but were there any songs that you recorded that didn't make the cut? You don't have to tell us what they were, but were there any like ones that you were hoping would get on?
Um, No, there was nothing that didn't make the cut. There we did different versions though of certain songs. Like Dustin Hoffman actually, we did a version of it that's very, very slow and swampy. And it's super cool. I don't think it'll ever see the light of day. We had this idea early on of doing alternate versions of a few songs and releasing it later. And I think maybe the steam has sort of let out of that engine a little bit, just because I think where we got Dustin Hoffman on the record is just so good. It's almost like why are we going to go back to that other thing that was cool, but there was a reason we didn't make that the version. Um, so yeah, I think there was an alternate version. There was definitely the alternate version of Dustin Hoffman. There was an alternate version of Silver Rising. There was an alternate version of Feel It Now, but it's not all that different. It's just much shorter and a much more sort of poppy arrangement. And then there's a really long dance remix version of Animal that we might end up getting to at
Ooh.
some point. It's like 13 minutes long and it's crazy. But I don't, it's a matter of like the will and the time to get around to doing it again. But
That's exciting.
yeah, yeah. It could be cool. I mean, I think there was definitely some appetite for seeing some of that stuff through, but we had to kind of get the record done. And then we were also, again, working on this other thing. So it's tough. Sometimes these guys move very fast sometimes. So it's hard to like keep some of that stuff in the playing field.
They're always moving on to the next thing. We always joke we'll record an episode and there'll be like 8 tidbits of news that come out
Yeah.
the day after we record
Yeah. Yeah.
and some new
Yeah.
project. But that has me thinking about we listened back to a ton of your interviews and try to read about as much as we could about Dripfield and that process. And you had mentioned at the time that most of those tracks were recorded kind of over a single day. So you'd pick the day for Arrow or you'd pick the day for Dripfield or whatever. Was that the case on EMG or was there more flexibility to kind of let things breathe?
No, no. I wish it were the case. I think we had to make this record in a really kind of separate multiple session fashion because of the nature of their touring. They were touring so much. When we made Dripfield, there was we were at the kind of like the middle of the pandemic, I guess, still really. And so there wasn't a lot of touring, and we had enough time to, it wasn't really a song a day as much as it was a song at a time. So on average, it worked out to
Yeah.
about a day or a day and a half to work on a tune. But um, this time we had, a block of like 2.5 weeks, and then they went on tour, and then another block of 2.5 weeks, and then they went on tour. And then maybe Peter went away or Rick went away, and then we had another block of 3 weeks. And then, so we kind of had to work on stuff like that. So a lot of it was like 2.5 weeks spent on basic tracks for these songs, and maybe some overdubs and stuff, but not staying in the song for a really long period of time. I prefer working where you stay in a song for a really, really long period of time because you're really, really understanding the song and you're kind of inside of it for a long time. And in this method that we had to make this record, you get into more of a checklist mindset where it's like, okay, we got this done. Now we have this, and this to do. And it's less about your moment, your reaction in the moment or inspiration than it is about like, yeah, we have this checklist of 15 things. We have to get these all done. So, there's like pros and cons to each. I mean, one of the pros of doing it the way we did it this time is that when you spend a little time away from something, you can be a little more objective when you come back to it. And so you can be like, yeah, that thing we did last time actually doesn't work as well as I thought it did. Let's get rid of it. Or I feel like this still needs something here or whatever. Sometimes when you're in a song for, a day or 2 days or 3 days, you might lose the forest from the trees a little bit. Um, but I still think my preference is working that way. And I certainly know that Rick and Peter and Trevor and Cotter's preference is working that way. So I think we're going to try as much as possible on the next thing to move back to working at a song at a time, and to try not to do stuff as piecemeal as we had to do it this time. We did a great job of it, but because of the circumstances, we couldn't make it any other way. But like I said, I mean, I've been doing this a long time, so I have a fairly good sense of how to like not get lost in the weeds when you are checklisting it, and still kind of foster some inspiration and newness and freshness. But it wasn't easy.
No, that's tough to like come back to something after dropping it, and maybe you had motivations or ideas you couldn't just get to.
Hmm.
But what really piqued my interest in your response there was you mentioned the next thing. Has work on something already begun, or is that just in talks? If you can
Uh,
tell us.
I can tell you that yes, there's something is already being worked on. Can't tell you what, and I won't tell you what, but something is already being worked on.
Oh, we'd love to hear that. That's all we need for now. Thank you
Yeah,
very
yeah.
much for that.
But there's something always being worked on. There is that.
That is true.
Yeah.
Definitely.
True.
And so going a little bit further into like the working in the studio, what is the general energy workflow in the studio with Goose when you're like in there for a day and a half or two working on a song? Is it pretty focused, or are they fairly chaotic, at least compared to other artists you've worked with?
Um, they used to be a little more chaotic actually, and now I think there's more focus. I think when we did Dripfield, maybe because of the fact that like I was doing a lot more in terms of I did a lot of playing on Dripfield, and I did less playing on this, although I did a lot of playing. I did less of it on this record and more of it on my own time. So, if we were at the studio in New York in Dreamland, the church studio where we tracked most of Everything Must Go and doing most of the band tracking, then, I would take stuff back to my studio and do some overdubs on my own. So there was less of that. And I think during Dripfield, if I was doing more of my overdubs during the time where we're inside the song, Rick might go for a walk or Peter might go for a walk, or they might get a group call, and then 2 hours later they come back into the studio. But I can fill the time because I can, do some overdubs or editing or whatnot. So I mean, chaotic is the wrong word, but I think a little more diffuse last time. And then this time, in the beginning, it was a little less focused. And I think part of that was because they were just coming off a string of like, I don't even know how many. They were did like 2 or 3 month long tours, and then we started the record, and then they were touring in between each time. So coming to the studio was almost like a vacation for them each time. But as the record got on longer and we got later into the process, they were more focused than in the beginning part. And also, I think once Cotter joined the band, there was definitely an invigorated sense of purpose, that helped a lot. And with some of the previous tensions, I think part of the tendency was maybe to try to diffuse those tensions by not being as focused. But once Cotter joined the band, it was like all hands on deck. Everybody was psyched and excited to be working on stuff.
Love hearing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is maybe a weird question for you, but coming from like a lot of indie listening from when I was a teenager and stuff like that, I often liked listening to commentary from producers or some of my favorite artists about weird quirks that landed on the album. Like one of my favorite bands, the Deer Hunter, Casey from that band, he mentioned that you can hear the floorboards in his old apartment creaking when he recorded his first album if you listen closely enough at a certain part, and like no one would ever catch that.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, are there any quirks like that have made the album that you've noticed that no one's noticed by chance?
Oh, I'm sure if I thought about it long enough, yeah. I like I like working in kind of wild environments. So like I like the doors open when we're working and I like windows open. And if birds get on it, I'm fine with it. And if a car drives by, I'm cool with it. Um, there's definitely some environmental noises on this record from having the big doors open at the church that we recorded it at for sure. Um, there's one part, actually, this is funny. In Animal, there's a scream after the first head comes back and there's a break after the first chorus, and that scream is Jeff. Jeff is on the congas at that point. And I think what happened is he actually fucked up the performance and then yelled at the very end, but I ended up keeping that yell. It wasn't intended. It wasn't a musical thing. It was just like, oh, that's great, and we're gonna use it. um, yeah, I'm sure there's some other stuff if I thought about it. Yeah, but I'm not. I love when that stuff happens. It's sort of serendipitous to me. I love the character of it, and it also, I think, puts you in a. I don't know. It's like very evocative if you hear like floorboards creaking, for instance. Yeah, I love that stuff.
Yeah, it's just so cool to hear those stories, and it's
Yeah,
like it just sounds like part of the sonic quality of the song sometimes.
totally. I do remember on Travelers and LMEG, we ended up. I think it was the middle section of the LMEG part one, or no, Travelers 1, 2, the beginning of LMEG. We recorded, this was at my old studio, and I had a deck outside. And I think we recorded Rick and Peter outside on the deck, just free in the open air, which was cool. And it was like springtime and it was really nice out. And yeah, so yeah, I love that stuff.
That's amazing.
Keep an ear out now.
Yeah,
I'm gonna definitely keep an ear out for
yeah.
it.
Kind of wondering too here, outside of like just Goose in general, but you obviously produce for a ton of bands. I was kind of going through your back catalog over the last week or two. Does your role, I'm curious, change as a producer, going from different artists or different albums, for instance, from like Bonnie Light Horseman to Goose, or from Dripfield to Everything Must Go? And if so, how do you go about resetting and changing your mindset when working with like different types of projects and artists?
Great question. Yeah, it definitely changes. Um, I do a lot of work where I'm sort of mostly responsible for being the sonic overseer, and then other records where I'm responsible for being the musical overseer and the sonic overseer. And in the case of like Goose, it's I'm definitely the sonic overseer, and I'm not as schooled in a classical sense as, say, Rick is. Rick, having gone to Berkeley and stuff, is just a master at theory. He would not call himself a master at theory, but I consider him a theory master. So when we're talking about parts, I'm always coming from a feel place. And if something doesn't feel right to me, Rick will think about some things often in a more literal theoretical sense, musically speaking, or a more studied perspective. Um, so I can't say I'm like the musical overseer per se on Goose Records. It's more of a collaborative thing between Rick and I and Peter, depending on whose song it is too. Um, but some records, it's like I'm working with an artist. I mean, Bonnie Light Horseman's a great example where Josh Kaufman, who's in the band as well, he and I do a lot of work together and work where he's producing the record and I'm recording and mixing it. So I'm sort of like working purely on the sonic side of things and he's working on the like songwriting side of things. And then there's other artists like Heather Woods Broderick is somebody I've worked with a lot. Her and I are doing a lot of writing together. And then there's other times where she's writing everything fully, and then I'm just sort of like pulling it all in and making it feel cohesive. So yeah, I mean it's definitely contextual, definitely changes for artists and for each record too. I would say I was probably more the musical overseer on Dripfield than I was on Everything Must Go, in terms of making more music specific decisions. Um, Not necessarily less so on Everything Must Go, but just in different capacities. Because again, I was trying to trust these guys more. They had given me so much trust on Dripfield, and this part of this record was me trusting them more with some of those decisions too. And if Rick felt strongly that a harmony was to go here or a part here, I was less inclined to veto that than I would have been on Dripfield. Um, so yeah, it depends on like, and I make a lot of multiple records with artists. So like Heather Woods Broderick and I have worked on 3 records together. I've done 4 Bonnie Light Horseman records, done 2 Fruit Bats records, done like 7 Craig Finn records. So yeah, it's like a lot of it is just reinventing, and I'm not even sure how I do it, but it's just becoming aware of what the record needs and I guess making internal perspective adjustments in a way that I can't really put words to understand my role. And sometimes it's about like coming into the role soft too, and not coming in like horns out. I mean, like Dripfield, I went in horns out, ready to go. I was like, "Group, give me the reins. We're gonna go for it." And even on this record, I probably came out more that way too. But there's other projects like Travelers and Elmeg was one where I had like distinct musical ideas and I had a pretty specific way I wanted to go about it, but there were also things about how they did it that I knew had to be intact. So I had to cede those to the band. It's tough. It's like it's almost a moment by moment decision too, because sometimes you're in working on a song and you're like, this thing that I had an idea about doesn't seem to be working. Where do I need to go? And oftentimes the answer is to step back out of the room, the metaphorical room, and then observe and stop injecting yourself. And it's a challenge to always remember that you're not the main character. Just because you're producing the record doesn't mean you don't have to make a decision about everything. You know what I mean? It's sort of this weird, very weird game you have to play with yourself where your ego really, where you have to realize that, yeah, these guys do a thing and I'm not going to get in the way of that. Rick soloing, for instance, like I'm not going to tell Rick what I think his best solo is. I'll tell him what I respond to emotionally, but if Rick is like, yeah, I think that solo sucks, or I think it's not as good as I want it to be, who am I to tell him he's wrong? So I let him go for it. And then if he gets in the weeds, that's when I step in and I'm like, yeah, I think emotionally I respond to this, this, and this. I don't respond to this and this. And then we have a discussion and then usually we find a way through. But yeah, like with decisions like that, it's like you have to know enough when your injection is not necessary.
Yeah, I love that. It's so cool how you can be like so flexible to take on different roles depending on what the project needs. Just thinking about what's going to work best for the project. I think that's awesome
Totally.
how you can wear so many different hats.
It's also cool to like to keep yourself open to learning.
Yes.
Like the minute you close yourself off to that or become victim of dogma, you're just like not doing your work any favors.
Yeah, being open to all the possibilities has my mind working again. Is there a story you have maybe of like a really unconventional like ritual or technique or path you took on any record, not just Goose, but Goose would be cool to hear for any track in particular or something like that.
I'm sure there is. I'd have to think about it a little more. We definitely did some bowl meditations before recording on this record. and we did a cacao ceremony one day, which was actually really funny because everybody was pretty wired on cacao. And I remember this funny moment where I think we were playing, I think we were tracking Atlas Dogs maybe, and Rick was like playing the banjo. We had a banjo in the room because I actually, and we did cut a banjo on that main Atlas Dogs. There's
Hmm.
a banjo in there, but Rick was like in the control room playing banjo, and Peter was playing acoustic guitar, and Rick just looked like his eyes were like super dialed up, and he was like, it almost was like he was coked out, and he was like, "We got to do it this way," and I was like, "No, dude, you're just completely whacked out on cacao right now." And then, of course, a couple hours later, it's like, "Yeah, we were just completely whacked out on cacao." Um,
You need a nap, dude.
yeah,
Yeah.
you need to like chill the fuck out, homie. But yeah, we did a couple bowl ceremonies. My assistant Jillian does singing bowls, Tibetan singing bowls. And so we did a couple meditations before recording. Rick has like his rituals that he does. Um, One thing we did a lot on this record was I kind of made it a rule. It wasn't a rule as much as it was just a thing, a habit we got into. Every day that we got into the studio and everybody got into their comfort zones and under headphones and stuff, we would just improvise for like an hour before we cut anything. And it was just a way to get people to play music together. And part of that was a response to some of the tensions in the band at the time. This was earlier on in the process. And because there was a definite, like, I noticed a lack of musical kind of coherence and connection, and just an emotional separation amongst people. And I think it was just the stress of a lot of touring and being around each other for months on end. And there's a difference when you're playing music on stage for people improvising. It's like that's an obligation, as creative as it is. It's an obligation because you've set up this performance, you have people who bought tickets, etc. And then being in the studio and then being comfortable and playing music together is a choice. And so it's felt to me like if we did that every day and just maybe made it a habit to get into the room and start talking to each other musically, it would help establish a nice language, a baseline language for everybody, which I think it did. And I think that went a long way to helping us be a little bit more free and kind of collaborative collectively in the studio.
Right on. That sounds like a great way to get a day started
That
and
was fun.
just loosen up even. Just
Yeah.
even if things are going perfect,
Yeah.
just loosen up for an hour.
I do remember one time blindfolding Peter on a keyboard solo because I felt like
Okay.
I don't remember what it was for. It might have been California Magic. Yes, actually I think it was. So he had played this keyboard solo. It was on a Hammond, I think, or maybe a clav. And it was feeling like I just felt emotionally like, you've done this before. You're not doing anything new. You're not doing anything really gripping and compelling. And so I put him on a different keyboard and blindfolded him. And maybe it was a different song. I don't know. Either way, I definitely remember because there's footage of it. I blindfolded him playing this synth solo. And I think it got somewhere cool because of it, because he just didn't know what he was doing. And he had to think about it differently. So he had to think about his phrases differently, and just kind of find a new way through the problem. But I do remember specifically on California Magic, I dialed up this sound on this really weird combo organ. It was like an old Vox organ or something. And some of the keys didn't work. And some of the other keys made really weird sounds. And so I fucked with the sound a bunch and just got it sounding really, really weird and strange. And they asked Peter, I was just like, go in and do a cool solo on this. Just to like, let's see what happens if it's just completely weird and really uncomfortable for you to play. And that's the solo that ended up on California Magic. And it's such a cool sound, and not something he was playing up till that point. He was just like kind of in a world that he was very comfortable with. He was playing on the Hammond or the clav, and he had done it a million times. But I wanted something that evoked something different, and I think we got there with doing it that way, just like a completely broken, fucked up instrument. And sometimes that shit doesn't work. You do it, and you're like, oh yeah, this is terrible. But it just so happened that that worked really, really well.
Oh my gosh, did it work? That I love hearing you say that that was your highlight from the album because it's definitely mine too. Outside of the new hotness of Dustin Hoffman and Iguana song,
Yeah.
like removing that, like never hearing those songs before, I think California Magic is my personal highlight too. I don't know about Mike, but I know it's way up there for him too.
Yeah, I think it was like my third favorite song off the album. So yeah, it just that one
Right.
completely transformed in like the best possible ways. Like it just defied our expectations, but like also somehow won us over within the first few seconds. Um,
Cool.
I did have a kind of sidebar non sequitur question. Just curious, did you happen to see any of Luna Luna? And do you have any thoughts in general on like event or experiences like that supporting the album?
I only saw a brief clip, I think like a 5 or 6 minute clip of the improv. I thought it was a brilliant idea. I think it's super cool to do different installations like that. And I thought the idea that they were just improvising fully was very cool. I know a lot of people had, it seemed like the audience had mixed reception to, or mixed feelings about the nature of the performance, but I mean, it wasn't a typical performance. So I guess your expectation, if you went into it expecting them to play songs, I suppose I could see why somebody was disappointed. But yeah, I think the more they do interesting stuff like that, they just it shows how much more interesting they are as just creative thinkers, you know. And I think there's an element of I think a lot of people misread it as, I see a lot of the comments on I'm not really a Reddit guy, but I do get forwarded these comments sometimes, just the really funny ones. And I've seen a bunch of the Goose haters, talk about how there's like a corporate thing with the band and all that stuff because they do events like that. And it's like, I don't know, man. That's pretty uncorporate to me. I mean, I don't know. It just seems really interesting and different, you know? And I think the more that they do stuff like that, it just kind of like reinforces the idea that they're doing something really special and different than most other artists.
Taking chances.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one thing I learned from Bob Weir when we made Bob Weir's record, he was talking about how much, I think there was a bunch of conversations about this, but I recall one night at dinner talking to him about the nature of how the Dead would improvise and if he ever felt like I think the conversation revolved around like how most people love like 72 the 72 live stuff, like that's the grand poobah of all the live Dead stuff. And Bobby said something to the effect of, yeah, I mean that stuff's good, but actually later like 77 was his favorite. But the conversation got to this thing of talking about how they failed more often than they succeeded, like by far, And he talked about the Egypt stuff and like the chance they took there with the
Hmm.
pyramids and like, but he was talking more generally about every time they played. He was like, if we played for 4 hours, probably 3.5 hours of it sucked. Like fans may have loved it, but they actually sucked for us, They were like failing way more often than they were succeeding because they were taking chances. And I think that's the total right way to think about it. And the key to this stuff is, you know, I mean, failure is in the eye of the beholder for one, and two, it's like I mean, what's the point of just doing the safe decision all the time? Why? Like, why bother? You've already done it. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's just not that interesting to me. And I don't know how a band would expect. I mean, this is the problem I have with pop music. These like predefined notions of what a good pop song is, the time limits and all that stuff. I come from that world on some level because I've been making records for so long. So I'm bound by the expectations of the record format to a degree. But like all of my favorite music, Miles Davis, like the electric period improvised stuff, krautrock, free jazz like Ornette Coleman, all the stuff that has no rules, no boundaries, that's my favorite shit. And it's because there's a lot of failure in it and the beauty is in the failure. I don't know. It's like it's really a perspective change, when you start learning to embrace the fact that you're going to fail, but that failure defines your successes in such a beautiful way. Not to say that Luna Luna was a failure. I should be clear.
No.
I don't think it was at all. I just think that like these guys like taking those chances and I think it's amazing. And it's something that was always lost on me with the jam band world. I just didn't really think about it in that way. Probably because I was used to, there was Fish and I mean I grew up I grew up mostly in the late 80s and 90s. That was when I was most absorptive to music. And Fish just wasn't in my purview at all. I was listening to other stuff. And then when I heard Fish later in my life, I think I was just not really receptive to the nature of the songs, but I liked their jamming, you know? And
Hmm.
then
Hmm.
but because of that, I never really let myself get taken in by the jam band world so much until later in life. And then when I worked with Bob, and then I understood what the Dead was and what that meant to people. And then obviously working with Goose, I have a new understanding of it. But it came as a shock to me to realize like a lot of the jam band world was about taking chances. And truly, and people
Yeah.
do love the experience of being in the room when a band takes a chance like that, and that thing of like lightning striking, is really special. And I totally get it. I mean, from that perspective, I completely get it.
Yeah, I mean, you said it earlier in this interview and many others that you don't feel like you're a part of the jam band world, but you sound like you are a part of it in the way you're talking and the way you're rolling your eyes at Reddit comments and all
Yeah,
that. That's
yeah.
all part of the jam band experience.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess that's right. I really, what I don't like, I definitely don't love. I remember when somebody, I think it might have been my wife or my assistant Jillian, sent me a thing. I had put up a story maybe a couple days after Lead Up came out. I had done a podcast interview about films with a friend of mine. And I was saying something about how in the film world, people have their reactions to films, but there's like this weird separation between the makers of the film and the audience, where the film like the film's not being made for the audience, and in the best case, even if the audience hates the film, they can't get any ownership over it. The film exists, it's just there, they have to accept it or not, they have to accept it on its terms. And I think somebody thought I was talking about people's reaction to Lead Up, because somebody made a comment like, "Is D. James Goodwin going to tell us how to we're listening to music the wrong way or something?" It was like a Reddit comment, and it was just so. I read
Or
this and I was just like, "Oh my god, stuff like this just drives me insane." This weirdly obsessive, and it's not jam band centric; it's Reddit centric. It's like this weird.
mhm.
I have way too much time on my hands. I'm going to go up and put this really irrelevant, nasty opinion online just because I have the time to do so and I have the anonymity to do so. And it just feels strange to me to see that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I the Reddit cesspool is a very deep cesspool.
Do got to give some of that credit of the nastiness to the jam band scene. It seems like weirdly it has inherited the worst of several like subgenres of culture that at least I'm familiar with. Like you've got like the tribalism of like diehard pop fans in some ways, I
Yeah.
feel like, and you've got like the pretentiousness of like hipster indie heads in some
Oh
cases, and
yeah.
like and it's just like it's a weird amalgamation of culture, but it's fun to talk about,
Totally.
and it's always new.
And the goose hate on Reddit is really incredible. I've seen it on the I guess it's the Jam Band subreddit. That's the title of it. And like
Oh
anytime somebody
yeah.
posts about Goose, it's like people go off. And I just don't really. I mean, I understand exactly what it is. Goose is successful, and it's like that thing where there's success, you have to like flame it somehow. But what I don't understand, or at least it amuses me, is like when people talk about all the Goose hate, but then they'll talk about how much they love another band. They'll reference how Goose is derivative or something, but yet the other band, like the guitar player always plays a Paul Reed Smith, and like they always kind of have quirky songs. I don't know. It's like there's just so much derivation in every genre of music. We've made so much music now in the course of human history that not being derivative is actually really difficult, right? Like not divining some influence from those things that have come before you is actually exceedingly difficult now. And
Right.
so when you think about that, it becomes very clear that the goose hate just comes from a place of envy and just some strange need to like knock something down. And I don't understand that at all. I just don't get that impulse. We just live in this beautiful world where music is being made, and you have the choice to just say, "Yeah, I don't need to comment on that. I don't like it. I don't need to comment on it." I mean, when I was a kid, it was like we didn't have access to that shit. So there was, if you just didn't like it, you didn't like it. It was just that simple, you know?
Yeah, and at this point, it's like a full-time job for some of these people who comment. Like,
Yeah.
at this point, we kind of just like roll our eyes and we're like, thanks for the engagement. Whatever fish fan 21 who comments on every one of our videos or whoever it is, like,
Right.
It's just crazy.
Yeah, and if somebody dares say something about the passing of the torch, which I always find a funny conversation, then like there's always 50 people waiting to just flame that person.
See, you're a jam band fan.
Yeah.
You just don't know it.
Yeah,
You're in it now.
But it is great though. I say this to Rick sometimes because Rick and Peter will get lost in the weeds. Okay, Peter less so, but Rick will get really bummed out about people when they say shit that really is just like nasty and just negative. And it's just a reminder, like if you have people talking about you in that way, I know it's a cliche, but you're obviously doing something right. You're captivating the public on a larger level. And with that comes the attendant side effect of some people are just gonna like talk shit because you're just getting more and more successful. It's just the nature of the beast. It happens literally with everything.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any other questions, Mike? I'm trying to look at our document here. It's kind of gone to shit because it's been a fun roller coaster ride of just.
I think we honestly hit on all of our questions, and then I think that Dan actually did us a service by hitting on some things from other questions that we asked. So I think we got to it. So if it's okay, every time we have a guest on here, like one of our main traditions is to kind of do like some rapid fire questions just for fun, if you're up for it.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, so I guess I'll just start off with, this is almost always the first question, but what is your favorite Goose song? Not just from EMG, but overall.
Favorite Goose song overall. My rapid. Can I count Traveler's El Meg as one?
I will allow it.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's probably it.
Yeah, I think that's mine
okay.
too.
Okay, actually though, I have to put a quick disclaimer in there. My favorite already released Goose song is that.
Yes, I agree with that 100%.
Oh, shit, you get hitting us with the teases today.
Building anticipation.
All right, how about your favorite musician or band or artist of all time?
Ooh, probably Miles Davis.
Nice.
Yep.
And favorite show you've ever attended?
Favorite show I've ever attended. Ooh. Favorite show. I'd have to say Tortoise, the band Tortoise.
Wow.
Okay.
Deep pool.
Yep.
Good answer. How about your favorite concert venue?
Ooh, that's a good one. Probably Red Rocks.
Nice.
Yeah.
Can't go wrong there for sure.
Just a beautiful place.
Can't beat that setting.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just music and nature together. If you can remember, what is the first album you ever bought?
First album I ever bought was Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon.
Oh my gosh, that's probably the best answer I'm ever going to hear to that question.
Yep.
Amazing.
And it obviously defined my life from that point forward. I was like,
Yeah,
okay,
how could it not?
I'm making records. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's the best.
Yeah, life-changing. So, do you have a go-to karaoke song by chance?
Oh God, no, I don't. I try to avoid karaoke at all costs.
That's totally fair.
Although one song I always sing, I don't know why. I forget the name of the song, but it's that In Excess song, One of My Kind. I think that's the name of it. I love that song.
Okay, yeah.
I'll sing it all the time, whether I'm in the car, like if I'm in the pharmacy and it's playing on the thing. It's like I just sing it for the next 3 days.
I was gonna pivot the question to what song are you embarrassed to be caught singing in the car or something like that.
One and the
you
same.
Nailed it.
Do you have a band or artist that's on your bucket list to see?
Oh yeah, actually, I really, really, really would love to see, and it'll never happen. I really, really wanted to see Genesis, and they're still going to be on my bucket list, just in the off chance that it happens. But yeah, that would be the one.
Yeah,
those tickets were ludicrous for their last tour.
Totally insane.
Yeah. What's your all-time favorite film?
Ooh, 2001: Space Odyssey.
Oh yeah.
Classic again.
Yep.
Dark Side of the Moon inspired there, probably.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, definitely.
Cannot go wrong with Kubrick. And then if you could pick any artist from any era to produce for, who would you pick?
I'm going to give a cop out answer and say that if I'm that big of a fan of them, then I don't need to produce them.
Okay, I love that actually.
Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, there are plenty of artists I'd love to share space with working on something, but I just, yeah, I don't think I would have the objectivity, if it was like, let's just say Peter Gabriel, one of my favorite artists of all time. Like, I don't know what I could contribute other than just being drooling in the corner, like, what the fuck am I doing here? You know what I mean?
Yeah, when we put the question on paper, it's like, now I think about it, it's like, yeah, the album is, or the artist is someone you love because of how it was produced in the first place. So
Totally.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Definitely.
All right. Now we're gonna get unhinged here, as we always do. Would you rather fight one elephant-sized goose or 200 goose-sized elephants?
200 goose-sized elephants. Probably 200 goose-sized elephants, because if you find the youngest of them and get them first, then the old ones will all come to one area to try to protect the young one, and then you can use your ingenuity to kind of try to kill them all with one shot. Whereas
No one has ever
no one's
put
ever
that
gotten
much
that
thought.
detailed.
One big fucker is way too difficult. That's like the big boss. I'd rather have the 200.
Oh,
I mean, I think we joke. I think I'd rather fight one elephant-sized elephant than one goose-sized goose sometimes, because geese are just vicious.
Geese are vicious, dude. I got attacked by a goose on a golf course years ago, and it was almost like that. I don't know if you've ever seen that Larry David episode where the swan attacks
yeah.
Larry. I mean, it was basically the same thing.
Yeah.
They're incredibly
Yeah.
intense and aggressive.
Absolutely.
I'm going to go off on a quick tangent here, telling goose stories. I travel a lot for my job, and I do site inspections of factories. And this one factory had geese that just populated their rooftop. And if you walked past certain parts of the building, they would swoop down and like tackle you from 40 feet in the air. And I got hit by probably like 7 geese in the matter of like 2 minutes, and
Jesus.
it traumatized me for life.
You should.
How I'm a goose podcaster now is weird.
You should write a song. You should write a book and call it Factory Fiction.
Oh, there you go.
That's incredible. Well, I think that's pretty much all that we had for you. So, unless I missed something, if you'd like anything that you'd like to plug, or any pages you'd like to share with the people back home, the floor is yours.
Oh man, just keep an eye on work coming out, because there's a lot of amazing stuff coming out, and not just goose. I mean, there's a lot of goose stuff coming out, but yeah, just I'm always working on records, so it's tough to always pedal one, because I'm always going to forget something. So I'm always making music, and I'm always really happy with everybody I work with and all the records I do. So yeah, just keep ears open. That's all I can say.
Well, we cannot thank you enough for coming on. This was a huge deal for us. I have been totally starstruck the entire time talking with you. So
Cool.
Thank you so much for coming on. It was really our pleasure.
Oh man, thanks guys. It was really, I love, this was a great conversation, because we were pretty free about it, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on.
Yeah, we'll have you on anytime you want. This is
Awesome.
awesome.
If I remember some of the hot takes that you guys had, I'll reach out.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, please.
We'd love that.
Do, because we love giving each other shit. We'd love for you to give us.
Well,
some shit too.
Alex, you were a big Arrow hater, right?
Oh, I
Just
could
a little.
not stand it. But I'm also the guy who gets really attached to like the chair I sit in, or like the guitar I play, or whatever. Like I get too attached to stuff.
I would bet you if you heard the Dripfield version of Arrow before ever hearing the other version, you'd feel the opposite, right?
1,000%.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I love the Studio Arrow, so.
Right on. Good taste, my man. Good taste.
I have terrible taste, and I know it, so it's all right. But actually, it has me thinking, though, because my perspective has really shifted with EMG quite a bit, honestly, of like, I'm like, why do I feel like I'm getting quote unquote like upset by something different, where I would be celebrating that if they were playing something different like that in the live setting, for instance.
Yeah.
Like hearing something new. So that's really, I've kind of been going on that journey a little bit the last month or so since the album dropped.
Yeah. I think it's a big part, like we were talking about before, of like records become even we're in this age, this era where records are less important now somehow, and we're in like the playlist era. But nonetheless, the recorded version of something like the proper studio version, I think we're all conditioned to believe is supposed to be the seminal, the one, like the benchmark version of a song. And I think
Hmm.
no matter what we hear, whatever we hear first is going to be the thing that we get captivated by the most, probably. So it's hard. It's like we're simultaneously, we want something new because we like the freshness. If they played it new live, you'd be super stoked about it. But because the studio version, we're conditioned to believe is supposed to be the benchmark version, if it doesn't meet exactly what you had hoped it would, it's a disappointment. And I think it's just hard to do the mental gymnastics to be open to it. I think that's really it's as simple as that, really.
Yeah, and to that point, it's like I fell in love with the song Arrow because I heard it like this. I want other people to fall in love with it for the same reason. But even then, I've walked that back a ton since listening through the studio albums. I'm just like, oh yeah, this is cool. Like it's different.
Yeah.
I was stuck in my dumb jam band Reddit fan ways, I guess.
You're not alone, my friend. You're not alone. But you know how many people after Everything Must Go came out? I literally got like 300 or 400 Instagram messages. I had to go through my message requests one day, and it was like 380 or something of people, pretty much to the number, all of them saying, I was so wrong about you, or I'm sorry about all the shit I said about you on Reddit or something, or like, thank you so much. I was completely wrong. These things, these are amazing. Just really funny. It was like 380 of those comments. It was kind of amazing.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Gives you
Just
some
gotta
hope.
give it time.
Give it time, man. Give it time.
There you go. All right, Dan. Well, thank you so much for coming on again. We would love to have you on anytime, and please feel free to reach out and give us any more shit at
Awesome.
any point. We would love that.
Will do. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Just want to thank D. James Goodwin again for an amazing interview. Thank you so much for everyone who stayed this long and listened to the whole episode. Just want to shout out to check us out on our socials at Slow Ready Pod to keep up with all the latest news and notes. Anything happening with Goose, we'll try to share it there. And thanks again for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks, guys.